Okay, the next section has to do with tracking volunteer hours. Paperwork. Why is paperwork important? In the structure that Koki described, the way Family Promise operates, we work with thousands of volunteers. If each volunteer, whether they come in and answer phones for 2 hours a day, whether they babysit children at our day center, whether they drive an adult to a job interview or are serving a meal, preparing a meal, spending a night in a church or a synagogue with our families, if you add all of those hours together, it's a very, very big number at the end of the year. So why is that important? When we write grants as nonprofits, we write a lot of grants to support our operations, and to be able to use a number of volunteer hours that you have behind you is very, very powerful. What that is saying is that, you know, we have a small but mighty staff, but we're able to move mountains because we have hundreds of volunteers that are standing behind us arm in arm to help our cause. So that number from a sheet, the first sheet is for an individual person tracking their hours. Now let's use Dan as an example. Dan is a board member. Typically board members are volunteers, right? So Dan goes to a board meeting once a month. He records his 2 or 3 hours. Then he volunteers at a soup kitchen at St. George's, just again as a volunteer. He's going to track those hours. Maybe he takes someone to lunch who's a prospective board member, or maybe he's interviewing a potential volunteer. He is volunteering on behalf of St. George's Center. So he's going to record his hours here. Now let's say he also represents his Kiwanis Club. So he's going to log those hours. Now maybe his fellow Kiwanians are doing a car wash to raise money for St. George's Center. He's going to gather their hours and combine it into one sheet and turn it into Miss Becton, who then can write a grant and say, this particular person, I mean, one person is responsible for hundreds of hours here, but if she combines sheets like this from everybody in her team, she's going to have big numbers to show the community support behind her.
I'm really very happy that Dan is here today because he can present this to the board, because I will share with you that getting this type of compilation from the board members is not easy.
We know.
So that can be his task. We have one board member right now that does this, and he does it because he gets an employee match. What he gives to St. George's, his particular position at his firm gives a match, and that's why he does this. But he is only one, and our board members do hours and hours. So, but I'll turn that over to Dan.
And that's a really good point. That's a very good point. Some companies will match your time, or your time will equate to dollars. And two, I think this is probably one of the most important little tidbits. How can I ask you to volunteer if I don't do it myself? It's just like giving a financial gift. I cannot ask you for 50 cents if I'm not willing to contribute 50 cents myself. It's the same idea.
The other challenge might be because your setup is similar to ours, where you have different congregations supporting. Gathering that information from those other congregations can also be a challenge. You just have to be persistent. You have to be persistent. And if you can find one coordinator at one of your congregations that is good at it, you can always kind of take their numbers and duplicate them as an estimate. Okay.
To get our board members to do a little bit of a better job of documenting their numbers, one of the things that we did was that there is an annual figure that is given for the value of a volunteer service hour. Mm-hmm. For 2012, it was like $22.14. So to be able to tell them about, so get your hours and multiply them by this value. especially the business people, really liked being able to quantify the monetary value of their help. It was just a trick, really, to get them to help with that. And the other thing that we're experimenting with at this point is we use a computer system called ACS, which we use for, it's a database system, and it has the ability for people to log in and track their hours directly into our database. We're only beginning that. So far it seems to be working pretty well, but it would not be too hard to set up a web-based, even an Excel worksheet that people could log into and put their hours in that you would be able to collect rather than building up too much paper.
I moved over here because I really have trouble hearing you all from over there. I am very skeptical of asking our volunteers to sign a timesheet for the time that they are putting in for their volunteer hours. I just think that they would be offended doing it, because they have so much to do, and this is just one more detail. What I do is I ask them to summarize for me the hours that they spend a week or a day, whatever, so that I have some idea of those hours. The 990 form that we submit requires some estimate of the hours of at least board members. But to do that with a form for volunteers, I think would be an issue.
It only has to do with the grants and being able to explain what, it has made the difference between getting grants and not for us. So that's, yeah.
And I think, too, if you're presenting it as, you're doing your orientation, so there are no surprises, when you sit down with that volunteer. And if you're presenting them a job description and, they're signing a document that they're going to be ethical and appropriate and all those things, it would seem like a timesheet wouldn't be that big of a deal, because it's kind of along those corporate lines. Obviously that has to be your choice. You know your volunteers best, but I can honestly say in my 30 years of working with volunteers, I've never once had anyone push back in just jotting down the time that they work on our behalf. They actually are kind of proud of it, has been my experience, that it's like my father-in-law who donates blood. He is so proud that that number continues to grow. And then we're about to get into the recognition portion, which will say to a volunteer, oh my goodness, you've just set a record. You've contributed X number of hours, that equals X number of dollars. And then it allows you to reward the volunteers for the time they're putting in. Just something to think about. Don't do something that you're not comfortable with.
And maybe it's not an individual sheet. Maybe it's just a place at your facility where when they come, they just sign in. And then, and then the log is in your hands. It's not another task so much for them. But it does. I think if you can educate them on the benefits of sharing. And again, you're not going to get it from everybody, but if you can get one or two that are consistent and you can kind of take estimates from that, which sounds like what you're doing, that works too. But those hours are important. They are, and we all know that sitting around this table.